A very warm welcome to each of you, to those who have joined us in CR12 at our campus in Sangli, Goa, and to those that have joined us online. On behalf of the Center for Public Policy and Governance and the General Management and Public Policy area, a very warm welcome to each of you who have joined us for this talk and interactive session with Dr. Arvind Veermani, Honorable Member, Niti Aayog. Dear sir, it's indeed an honor and a privilege to have you with us here today to hear from you on India Vision at 2047, Viksit Bharat. On behalf of the CPPG and the General Management area, I extend a very warm welcome to you, and we are extremely eager to hear your insights and to hear your presentation and to be a part of the same. I now request Professor Kinshuk Sarkar, Chair, General Management and Public Policy Area and Member, Center for Public Policy and Governance, to welcome our honorable guest, Dr. Veermani.
Good evening, all. Dr. Arvind Veermani, Professor Sebastian Morris, Professor Venkatesh, Dean Academics. On behalf of Center for Public Policy and Governance and on behalf of General Management and Public Policy area, it's a great pleasure and privilege for us to have Dr. Arvind Veermani, Member Niti Aayog, here for today's evening talk. So, Dr. Veermani will be talking about India at 2047, quote unquote Viksit Bharat. So I just take this opportunity to introduce Dr. Veermani. Dr. Arvind Veermani is a member of Niti Aayog. He specializes in macroeconomics and policy and institutional reforms for sustained inclusive economic growth. He was a founder chairman of the Foundation for Economic Growth and Welfare, IGRO, and president of the Forum for Strategic Initiatives, FSI, Delhi. He was closely associated with the tax, tariff, foreign exchange, financial sector, and expenditure policy reforms carried out during 1990s and 2000s. He was earlier served as Executive Director, IMF, Chief Economic Advisor, Ministry of Finance, Principal Advisor, Planning Commission. He was also the Director and Chief Executive of ICRIER, Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations, and has published over 60 journal articles, books, and book chapters, and more than 100 working papers and policy papers in macroeconomics, growth, tax and tariff reform, foreign exchange, international relations, and national security strategy. His experience in financial sector includes being the chairman of the board of trustees of SBI Mutual Fund, director Life Insurance Corporation of India, member of SEBI Appellate Tribunal, member board of trustees Unit Trust of India, and director in Punjab National Bank, Allahabad Bank, and Exim Bank. He was a member of the Telecom Authority of India, Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, TRAI, a mentor for public policy and economics to FICCI, and also member of the Technical Advisory Committee of Monetary Policy, Reserve Bank of India. So it's a great honor for us that Dr. Veermani has taken time out from his busy schedule and agreed to give a talk on this very important topic. So on the topic, I now invite Professor Sebastian Morris to just introduce the topic before Dr. Veermani starts his talk.
Well, I won't spend much time. It's a great honor and privilege to welcome Dr. Veermani, who has been at the forefront of India's reforms and its transformation from a slow lagging economy to a very rapidly growing economy. Okay. We owe a great deal to him and his teams and so on, who pushed through the first generation of reforms and then stayed there to create and to push other reforms as well. Now, this is about India becoming a developed economy. So I can't imagine anybody better than Dr. Virmani to bring to us the various points of view and what would be required from the economic policy side to achieve that growth. So he has a very extensive presentation, and he'll take us through that. Okay? Yeah, so high growth would naturally involve inclusion. How we do that inclusion is, of course, a matter of debate, whether through land reforms, education, public investments in education, healthcare, or training and skills. High and rapid growth is probably the most important factor in inclusion, because productivity can rise at 4%, and clearly the growth has to be much, much higher in order to absorb labor. Can we have this growth without strategic macroeconomic policy? What happens to interest rates, exchange rates, and to aggregate demand? Can we have, shouldn't we not have governance reforms? Can we actually become a developed economy without major changes in governance? Perhaps that's not a very important topic, right? I mean, that's not going to be covered now, but at least we'll have an insight into the economics of rapid growth and transformation. Technology, what do we do about technology, GHGs, and now the new challenge of AI and agriculture? So these are some of the things that kind of arise in my mind. The challenge is there. But over to Dr. Virmani to lay out his talk and point to specific things that he thinks are important, and in order for India to achieve a developed state by 2047. So we really look forward to his insights and to his presentation. So thank you, Dr. Virmani, for having most kindly accepted, and to make this presentation.
So now I invite Professor Virmani to start his talk.
Thank you for your kind words. I generally tend to speak for too long, so I generally don't have an introduction. I leap into it because I know people get bored after 40 minutes, and sometimes I go too long. So I'll just wade into it, and then we'll see. So thank you for the invitation. It's my pleasure. The goal which we have, I should just add that this is kind of my version of the vision or goal, etc. It overlaps with what Niti, the Prime Minister is head of Niti, so PM will reveal his vision at an appropriate time. I cannot say when. This is not that vision. It's kind of mine, but it overlaps with what you will see in a couple of months whenever he. So that's the background. So what is the goal? The goal, India is a lower middle income country, and the goal is to become a upper middle income country between 2030 and 35, and an higher income country by between 2045 and 50. I won't go into the details of how I define it, but if you have questions and clarification, all depends on how technical you want to get. So I'm just going to leave it there. Those who want to know what that it is, I'll explain. And commensurate social indicators. So I will say, I'll come back to the social indicators at the end, which is kind of important. The instrumentality is straightforward, obvious, sustained, fast, inclusive growth. Where does that come from? We know from experience of Southeast Asia and many other countries. This issue, some successors to my role of chief economic advisors, etc., have raised this issue of manufacturing versus services. In my view, that's a red herring. India has to do everything, actually. So it's the last opportunity for low, medium skill manufacturing employment. Services, I reverse. Everybody thinks of high-end services. I reverse this thing. I'll say a little bit about this, that from high to medium to low skill services, actually. And in my view, everybody focuses AI on labor substitution. My whole effort and objective is to raise this. That's why, given that process, to allow low-skilled people to do medium-skilled work and medium to high. It's a complete reversal of what you'll read in the AI. Again, I don't know how much time I'll have on that, but it'll come into what I have to say. So the focus of my talk is on what's kind of new and different. In the old days, we used to have planning. Planning was abolished when NITI was set up, the Planning Commission and NITI. So my talk is not about planning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on give you some key trends, global and Indian, relevant developments in the economic and geopolitical area, and our own weaknesses. And the way I look at it, that's part of my macro job in NITI, is to how to convert these into opportunity. Don't think of weakness as a constraint, which is going to slow us down, but how to make it an opportunity. Elements of strategy. Anybody who's done growth theory knows all these things. I just mentioned them because the catch-up growth technology, that's a growth theory which I generally use. Everybody knows about human capitals, technology, physical infrastructure, etc. But where it's different from planning is that we think of it as creating the economic policy and institutions for promoting investment, employment, and growth, rather than planning the economy. So that's a fundamental difference, which I'll have a little bit more to say upon, and focusing on inclusion and empowerment to set up a virtuous circle. What are the major trends and developments? The most important is demographic. India and the world, I'll say more about it, so I'll leave that here. Digitization. I think the internet and hybrid system digitization is going to drive many things in India. So perhaps I'll say a little more on that. The geopolitics of oil, I will not come back to, but the important change in our policy is earlier we were thinking of climate change, energy in terms of resisting the pressures of the developed countries to do more than a poor country could do. Now we have changed that paradigm to say, to link it with oil, that oil is a bad thing for us, and therefore we need to switch to solar. And there's a big change in that, and a wholehearted effort to go for renewable energies to reduce the dependence on oil, which is then consistent with the global objectives of reducing carbon emissions. Aggression and threat of war. I hope all of you are familiar with what happened in 2020, the aggression on the north, but all these wars happening, China, Europe, Middle East. Again, I told you that the approach is to convert threats and weaknesses into opportunities. So the Atmanirbhar defense equipment and tech is again related to these uncertainties and wars, but use it in a positive sense to drive growth of defense industry and employment and indirect benefits to the economy. Supply chain monopoly risk. I'll say a lot more about, as I said, about demography and supply chain monopoly. This is the last opportunity. Of course, it's coming from the global perception of risk. I will tell you something a little bit more about it, data, to show how risky this has been, how we have ignored this problem. But now that the world is thinking of de-risking, diversification, decoupling, how it is a great opportunity, the last opportunity for us. So we don't shy away from weaknesses. The basic, one of the biggest weaknesses is the basic education and job skills. There is some World Bank study which shows that 55% cannot read properly at the primary school end. For more than 15 years, I have been pushing, when everybody talks about higher education, frontiers and all, I've often rolled my eyes and thought, let's get the basic education and job skills. So I think it's very natural for all of us. I'm a middle-class person to think of our own children. But as a macroeconomist dealing with poverty growth for 30 years, it's kind of my job to think about the rural areas, the people who don't have rural jobs. So the basic education, just reading, writing, arithmetic, I think it's critical. to the future, and we can do it. Female labor force participation, I believe, is again, it's a weakness. Though there has been a recovery, again, we can discuss further. In fact, I will bring that in that digital context, which I mentioned to you. Agriculture, I think we will have questions. I just heard some questions, so that wasn't part. The agriculture part I had put into the appendix, but it's still there. We can discuss it further because a very complicated issue. But yes, we need agricultural diversification and manufacturing share in value-added exports. So this is the big issue which we will I will talk a lot about and related to import substitution of People's Republic of China imports and joining MNC supply chain. These are the two key elements of the strategy. So let's start with the first important issue, demography. So if you look at the graph on the right, the first two columns tell you this whole table relates to the country's share of world working age population, where for convenience I have taken 20 to 59-year-olds. The last three columns gives you the actual shares, and the first two columns give you the change in shares. So I have given three levels. One is the high income countries, the first 5 countries on top, the upper middle income countries, and the lower middle income countries. And if you go down the first column, this is what has happened in the last 15 years. All the developed countries and many of the upper middle and high income countries, sorry, I shouldn't say developed, because high income countries, there's a specific meaning to it and a definition. When you say developed, it gets confusing and everybody has their own definition. So China, Thailand, Russia, they've already had a massive decrease in their share of working age population. And you look at the second column and you say all are reds, okay, except for India, which is at the bottom. So all the developed countries, all the upper middle income countries, including Thailand, Mexico, Indonesia, which are often thought of as our potential competitors, and Vietnam, which if you read the papers about supply chains, all of them will have a loss of share. India will only have a gain. So what we are talking about here is the basic comparative advantage that India will have. The way I define it in dynamic terms is that we have to move from unskilled, or low skilled is actually the right word for it. Unskilled is not right. In the modern world, you can hardly be unskilled. Semi-skilled to high skill intensity. One of the questions which people roll their eyes and say, oh, well, we talk about Bangalore, it has so many million people in the high end. Why are you talking about low skill? Well, I'm talking about, again, 1.4 billion people. I'm not talking about 2 million in Bangalore or elsewhere. And maybe I'll give you a little more idea about that. But the basic demographic is the main point here, is going to drive in association with many other things. And I'll come back to, I will start with the manufacturing and come back to how this is going to affect the service sector. So what is the development strategy? I've started using, we talk about a laissez-faire American market economy, kind of socialist or something variant of European economy. So I call our economy an Indian market economy, just to distinguish it, which has, I think, a much greater focus on complete and efficient markets and information barriers and information asymmetry. Basically, because we are a lower middle income country. They are already high income countries. They don't have to think of these things, but we have to think of them. And in some sense, as a macroeconomist dealing with who has to advise on these issues, this is kind of fundamental in my view, that the market economy, we want competition like everybody other market economy, but we have to be very careful about ensuring that markets are complete and there are no asymmetries, etc. Again, this will be of interest to economists. Maybe business people won't have much interest, so we'll just leave it at that. And then defining the role of government and private sector. Again, this comes from basic economics, which I'll just mention the things: public goods provision and regulation, market environment the government has to create, welfare transfers and empowerment. In my view, this is a new thing. In the last 10 years, there's a much greater focus on empowerment. And then the private sector has to compete, innovate, and invest. So there's a government's role and there's a private sector role. And the policy reforms have been, well, since 91, but including last 10 years, because people don't recognize how many reforms have been done. So I've got 2 slides on that just to mention. So we are creating the environment for private sector to invest and innovate. So that's the idea. There's no longer planning. We are not saying do this industry or that industry, but we have to create the environment. And sometimes and often we have to then talk to industries which are either having problems, et cetera, to make sure that the environment is there. So what are the reforms? So systematically, and again, I'm talking not from newspapers, but I was there in the 91 reforms. I know exactly what our strategy was. Basically, we focused on 2 aspects. One is freeing up the product markets and the financial sector related to it. Everything else kind of got postponed. Now, over the last 10 years, we have systematically looked at the other market, the factor markets, the public sector, etc. The institutional reforms, I will mention for those who don't remember, the IBC, the MPC, the GST, these are big institutional reforms. GST is a tax. You might wonder, is tax reform is institutional reform or just policy reform? It's institutional because this is the first major constitutional change in the history of related to economic issues in the history of India, independent India. So it's a big institutional change. The indirect tax, the founders did a very great job actually. If you look back on it, in the fundamental economic principles, except for 2 things. One is they didn't recognize that you need a single market. So they broke up the indirect taxes and assigned them to the state. So what this GST does is it brings it together. It creates a single market for the first time. I won't go into all the others. Let me move on. Again, any of these things you want to discuss, we can come back to it. The second aspect is to abolish outdated laws, decriminalize economic laws. Again, people don't think of laws as institutions, but if you look at the Nobel Prize winner on institutional reforms, he defines institutions as laws and rules, and not just the formal rules, but which define economic activity. So laws are fundamental to institutions of economic of the economy. Bureaucratic reforms, you may have heard of the word EODB. And one of the elements of strategy is to use technology to skirt barriers. Sorry, if you can just, so that I can continue. And then, of course, social welfare reform and equality of opportunity, the public goods. So provision of public goods to every community, to every geography, etc. So that is part of the social welfare. Thanks. And rural-urban differences. So what is inclusion? I've said some of these things, so I'll go through it. One, of course, is the basic stuff, which is not new, which is basic needs. We talked about it, I don't know, 60s, 70s. Except for sanitation. That is a big new thing. But the idea is really a little bit from going from giving a continuous, I don't want to use the word dole, but that's what they call it in the West, but giving a revenue subsidy versus a capital subsidy. So there is a change in perspective that you give them, you have a kind of empowerment. So you make sure they have the electricity connection and the electricity is available in that village, water and fuel, LPG. You know, I'm not sure, many of you listening are probably very young, But I still remember not so long ago, a couple of decades, when we were talking about moving from wood to kerosene. I mean, the rapidity with which that kerosene has completely disappeared. I mean, some of your older people will realize. I still remember having heated discussions about replacing fuel wood with kerosene, and then suddenly it's all gone. It's all LPG. Sanitation, still incomplete, lots more work to be done. And again, if you have time, it's such an important thing. People don't realize. I'm not sure I've convinced everybody in my own government. I mean, there is, of course, the toilet program, which now I think even according to World Bank studies is 93%, is a big step, but there's a lot more to it. And then empower every section of society in every region. This I must say, this is an economic talk. I'm not going to get into politics, but I must say that, when the Prime Minister went on to the ramparts of on Independence Day and talked about sanitation, people were horrified. I still remember economists said, what kind of Prime Minister is this? He's talking about toilets at Independence Day. I was thrilled. I was the first economist in the country and the world to welcome that statement. Because I've been talking about for 15 years. And I'll tell you, I have papers, and there is now 10 new papers showing that sanitation is what is responsible for malnutrition of children. I wrote this paper in 2006. Anyway, we'll come back to it, but the rest of it is the empowerment. That's what I was going to say. This is the big thing about the Prime Minister. He actually, of course, you can say it's partly politics. Everything is politics, okay? So whether you're talking about women, youth, power, okay, you can say it's politics, fine. But he really believes, I mean, I have seen him in action, that every section of society must be empowered. Every geography, every section. Now, this is a very foreign concept to European welfare economics, okay? There's an arm's length thing. And this is related to what I call the Indic market economy. If you want, so financial education, again, I'll come back if there's some interest in it, but this Diksha program, which I learned about, I joined the NITI about 15 months ago. And this is one of the amazing programs which I've come across. I'll talk about it later if there's time or in the question. So this empowerment, okay? So whether it's entrepreneurship, startups, innovation, Atal Innovation Mission, I just saw the sign. I thought if I'd come earlier, I would have gone to see how it's working. But this is very clear objective of the Prime Minister. He wants every section of society to have the same opportunity. After that, what you do with it is your issue, okay? But they must be empowered. And then, of course, the role of the social sector, we can discuss that. So you might say, okay, all this hand waving is happening. What is it? I keep reading in the newspapers, everybody says, oh, there's unemployment is increasing, this, that, and the other. So I want to give you some data fact. These are data I have gathered myself personally, and of course, with the help of friends who are known researchers. So here is some data. The figure on the left is the worker population ratio. Now, why worker population ratio? Because if it is rising, that means the job. This is the best thing we have about job. There is no other data related, in the US or elsewhere, you'll have tons of data. But this is the best data we have in defining how many jobs are created. And the worker population ratio says that the amount of jobs created is rising faster than if it's going up. So this is what it shows. The usual status, the blue line, just tells you in terms of numbers. It doesn't give you the man hours. The pink line tells you effectively how many man hours of work related to the population. So there is no doubt that this is the best data there is, and it's rising. You can argue about how fast, etc. But there's a clear rise in the rate of growth in these numbers on the table. On the last column, the first two tells you it's between 3.7 and 3.3% per annum over this period. This period is the agriculture year 17-18 to 22-23, which is a period of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years over this 5-year period. Okay, between 3.3 and 3.7% per annum. This is the real rise in the worker population ratio. Then below that, some numbers on the real wages. Okay, so what is unique about this is that the totals are messed up and untrustworthy in my view. So anybody who gives you total numbers on on wages, these are overall annual wages, but you have to divide them into at least these 3 categories. It's casual workers, salaried workers, and self-employed. Self-employed are not workers for anybody. They are self-employed by definition. You can't mix all these things together. Okay. So what I did was I got somebody to separate these out into 3 categories, and then I've used my own deflator. Deflator is always a problem. Okay. So I have a deflator which matches the agriculture year. Okay. Based on the CPI monthly averaged out over the agricultural year, because this is the agricultural year, which goes from June to July. Okay. It is not the calendar year. It's not the financial year. That's how the data is collected. Okay. So what it shows you is was a huge surprise to me actually. So at the last column, if I look at the self-employed had the highest real growth over this period, real, deflated 4.2% per annum. The second highest was casual workers, 3.1% per annum. This is the data which corresponds to what you see in employment on the left. Okay, they are related data. They are not completely from arbitrary sources. The same data source. And the slowest one is salaried workers, 0.6% per. If you look at this data, all this stuff about K-shaped growth, and all these words you keep here, I don't know where it comes from, frankly. This is the data. I have not massaged it. I've told somebody to get that thing for me. I have put a deflator in. This is what it gives you. Okay. Second element, of course, you can say, so we are not even talking about per capita GDP, which anybody can see from World Bank or anywhere else, but the data which you don't normally see. So here we have multi-dimensional poverty indicators. Of course, needless to say, India is meeting SDG goals, one of the few countries, but that's not my objective here. But what we have is improvement in all goals: health, education, infra access. So we talked about LPG, but we also talked about electricity, etc., housing. Greater improvement in lagging states. So this minus, the negative you see in the first column is the decline in what is called multidimensional poverty indicators. Overall, the average has gone down by about is reduced by about 15.5%. Sorry, reduced to, not by, and that has come roughly half. It was 28. Incidentally, for those who like data, these are based on NFHS surveys that are done by the Independent Population Council based in Bombay or thereabout. So this 15.5% multidimensional poverty is roughly the same as the $3.2 a day poverty we estimated in a paper. The BVR is wrong. It should be BVV, which is my name. Bhalla, another B and V, not R. I don't have any R in my name, so that's wrong. I don't know how I did that. Anyway. Okay, now some of the other indicators. I talked about the digital economy. I believe is very important. That's why I'm emphasizing it. This is going, in my view, is going to be an instrument for inclusive growth and equality of opportunity. To use it for empowerment. I mentioned that Diksha, if I have time, I'll come back to it. But platform, portals, programs, expert systems. Use digital hybrid systems to get to people, the male-female divide, the rural-urban divide, the rich-poor, the poorly educated. And for that, obviously, you need universal access. So for the last 10 years or so, I've been saying we must provide connectivity to every village and habitation in this country. That is what is going to drive that. Remember that working age population, it's all over the country. We have to get them into the digital economy. So how does the digital economy help? I don't know if I have a second slide. Let me just see. Yeah, I have the information one. I'll just tell you. But the quality of education and health provided. I mean, think of, let's say you are in a rural area. You have some local teacher. Okay. Sometimes you have one teacher teaching 5 classes. Okay. I mean, those of you who are from rural know this better than me. I've only lived in urban areas, but part of my job to know. So what is it? Well, when you connect, you can give them access to a specialist teacher in each grade. What does the teacher do? You don't have to have multiple teachers for all. The teachers which are sitting in the urban areas are actually helping that teacher. They can provide the teaching material. They can guide the teacher to guide the students. So there are multiple ways in which this digital hybrid economy can improve the quality of access to the rural areas. Increase in female LFPR, work from anywhere. You heard of work from home, right? When the pandemic struck, people started working from home. But one of the indirect effects of that was work from anywhere. I think it was mentioned by your dean just now, but in other places also, the professionals are going to places where they have a nice atmosphere. So Delhi professional will come to Goa and then work from here online. You don't have to be in Delhi. People I've heard from UK go to Portugal. It's cheaper. It's a nice ruralish compared to London. So on. But for me, from my perspective, it's a means of providing work in the home of rural women who are not allowed to go out. I'm using in a simplistic way. There are many complex factors, but again, we can get into those. So it can skirt the mobility constraint on women, particularly in rural married women. Okay. So the second aspect is scalability. So India is pioneering the third way in information. You all heard of digital public goods, but the importance of digital economy is the scalability. It can solve the scalability problem. Okay, if you have a successful thing in one village, you can then distribute it digitally to every village in the country. The scalability problem is solved. What we have seen is if an NGO is successful in Karnataka, it doesn't replicate in UP or somewhere else. Okay. But here you can use every model and see. You are doing it all digitally. You see which one works. So this scalability problem can be solved. So get right information to right people at the right time. And this is particularly important for low income, less educated, low skilled workers. And the other aspect of it is services with medium skills, another very neglected area. You can use hybrid systems to get for example, construction labor, health, education, skilling, government. I'll give you one example because it's hard for people to understand. Of course, in general, when we set up the skill development mission, when I was in the government in earlier period, in the UPA government, was that there were 5,500 to 6,500 different skills which were standardized and certificates. People, when you think of education, tell me, you'll think of a college teacher, a school teacher, etc. 3 months ago, I learned there's an NGO in India which has classified 13 different certifications for people below the school teacher level. Below the school teacher level. 13. And they claim, and I have no reason to disbelieve them, that everybody they have trained and certified has got a job. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about here, okay? I won't waste more time on it, but this whole medium skills is Very, very important. People don't realize a slightly higher end medium skill is like a physical therapy. You know, if somebody is a child or somebody has an accident, they need physical therapy. It's not, doesn't happen by itself. I mean, you may be okay, but you need a trained physical therapist. And if you have mental problems, you need a mental therapist. Okay? There are tons of skills like that which we need, okay? Which we don't have. We don't even think of them. Okay. So that is what, in my view, that digital hybrid economy makes possible. Okay. Now, this is part of that big advantage which I was talking about, the last chance we have. So how do we maximize manufacturing employment? Why we have a chance, etc. So I'm just going to give you some data, because many people don't believe this till the numbers are there. So I'll give you data. So the starting point of this is that, unlike our earlier thinking that somehow everything would be driven by China and you want to connect to that, I am saying high income developed countries are complementary in economic terms to us, and we must use this. This is the last opportunity. We are probably the only country which didn't do this. The whole of Southeast Asia, etc., all did this. Okay, and I look at it in terms of complementarity, purely simple economic concept. So sources of technology and FDI, largest market for manufactured exports. I'll give you some numbers. 2/3 of supply chains are led by MNEs and MNCs, of which 3/4 are headquarters in USA. Again, people, this is something I'm trying to educate again, people, my colleagues in government, if you call them, that the USA is going to be critical for manufacturing for us. Okay. Rest in US, UK, Japan are okay. There's a close association between MNCs, MNCs, the FDI in a country and its import of merchandise goods. It's all connected. So what we need to do, and which we are finally beginning to do, maybe 30 years later than we should have, but better late than never, red carpet to greenfield FDI, like Apple, Foxconn, whoever you can get. Vietnam is succeeding now because in 1996, they invited Samsung, just one country, one MNC, probably the only one from Korea. Okay. In the 1980s, Thailand invited the Japanese company Toyota, one company. Much of their success can be traced to that one great decision. It's amazing. I won't have time to. Okay, so let me give you a little data, the table 4. What this data is telling you, I'll read it out. You can look at it later. By the way, as far as I'm concerned, this is available. You can ask, to distribute this. I have no problem. So USA, the 4 countries, you remember I mentioned high income countries in the demographic. It's all connected to that. That's why I gave you those things there. Okay, they are the source of 60% of global FDI, which is 7 times that of China. Import 53% of the world manufactured imports, which is 5 times China. Just Japan, UK, Korea, 3 of the smallest of those 5, which I've said, US, EU, if you leave out, constitute as large as a market for foreign manufactured goods as China. Okay, just those 3 countries, which are now thought of as small compared to China. So in my view, FTAs with USA, EU, UK, Taiwan, we already have with Japan and South Korea. We are discussing with UK. We've started the process with EU. Those are going to play a vital role. Here is the thing, the de-risking. So in the pandemic, everybody realized that supply chains can be disrupted, and they suddenly discovered it's all coming from China. What does that mean? Here are some numbers. Okay. China has monopoly of telecom, ADP, and electronics equipment. 40% of world exports of these 3 categories come from China. If you look at the table, and remember, there's a 4-digit level. If you go to 6 and 8-digit, there'll be many things. There'll be 100%, completely dependent. But just a few numbers there. The highest one I could find, you can see it there, right? Okay. Look at the top, 67%. 2/3 of pottery comes from China. It's amazing. You know, anybody who's worked on trade, I have never seen numbers like this in history. So very high share monopoly rents because because they got confused. The People's Republic is not like any other country. It's ruled by communist China. They control everything. If you don't believe me, please read my 2006 paper in the Planning Commission. It's now on the EGRO website. It's called Socialist Market Economy, Lessons for Democratic Developing Countries. Okay. It talks about what is called a socialist market economy. Again, if we have time, we can talk about it if you're interested. So it used unfair mercantilist policies to dominate these experts. It didn't just happen. It's never happened in the world before. It's not happenstance. So world can use similar policies with respect to China to de-risk. That's the key point of all this. Okay, so I'm going from there. So this is the last opportunity. The two key elements I have told you about: de-risking from China, shifting supply chains to India, and then using the FTAs with the developed countries to a close relationship with them. Okay, now skills and services. This is that dynamic advantage beyond looking. So the supply chain opportunity is short term. It's only possible in the next 10 years or so. Okay, but the long term play is still services. Okay, I already mentioned the first one. So let me start with domestic and give you a little bit of the international. You probably already got a sense of the domestic semi-skilled, skill intensive. I've mentioned construction, repair, maintenance, health. I've given you some examples, but at every levels we have not even thought of. And education skilling, again, I gave you the example of education. So let me move to the global part of it. So in the 80s to 85 to 2000, roughly, manufacturing unbundled. I don't know. This is something which all MBA people should know. What happened was before, manufacturing used to be a single factory. So if you're producing shoes, you produce everything. You start with the leather or some kind of leather thing, and you bring in stuff and you keep making it and sell the shoes, or you're making leather garments. In the 80s, they started unbundling the processes, and all done by MNEs, the multinational. They decided we can separate these things out and take the labor intensive parts first to Southeast Asia, then to Japan, Korea, I mean, not Japan, Korea, and then to China. Okay, so it got unbundled. The simple thing was that, but then the more complex things like telecom, etc., it's multiple moves. You know, you can have something go into China, they'll assemble it, then it'll go somewhere else, some other thing will be added and come back to China for final setting. So it's more complex, but it's same unbundling. So what my point here is that the same thing is going to happen to global, to services, okay? We already heard about call centers, BPO, fintech, etc. The big thing which has happened, which is again useful for all of you in MBAs, is that business services have started happening in the last 3 to 5 years. Just for your interest, the interesting thing about that is that for the first time, we are on a rising curve. So that is one of the services which is rising the fastest in global trade, and we are on it. And our share in that is rising, okay? So we are on to a good thing. I don't need to worry about it, but I need to tell you. So that's not my job. It's being taken care of. I don't need to worry about it, okay? But what I'm concerned about is that it's going to happen in many other things. In health, in wellness, in education, in government administration, okay? Think of health. Think of aged care. Much of it is you will have a nurse sitting there 24 hours a day. All that can be unbundled. You set up monitoring, they will, because they won't have the people. The developed countries, you remember those numbers I showed you? Their share of working age population has been going down the last 15 years, going to go down further. Even the USA, they used to say is not doing that because they allow immigration. It's happening there also. But anti-immigration sentiment is rising everywhere. So the choice was you bring in immigrants. They are not going to do that because of anti-immigrant sentiment. So this unbundling is going to happen. okay? And therefore they need us, but we need them too. So we have to think how to exploit it, okay? In fact, there's a role for the institution you all run also. So, let me give you an example of government which you won't think of, okay? I told you about monitoring. So the monitoring will be from India, but if there's any problem, you alert immediately. You alert the nurse or you alert the doctor, whatever, okay? You can get there as quickly as if you were sitting there, okay? You don't need to be there. So that'll get unbundled. Many other things like that. But government, so what about government? I was in OECD meeting in Paris about 9 months ago. And there was an expert committee or something there, or a consultant they had set up, and they were saying they can't find enough people. Oh yeah, the people from different countries, they don't have enough people for government services. They can't hire them. They're not there. Okay, this is OECD, Europe. So what will happen? There are many government services which will get unbundled again. Okay, and they should and can be done in India and must be done in India. Let me tell you one example, taxation. For last 3 years, my tax thing, I'm not a business person, so my tax return is kind of virtually automatically calculated by the tax department. It's all now online. All I need to do is download it, sign it, and make sure that there are 1 or 2 things which are not perfect, but and it's filed. So there'll be many other things like that. Just take a thing which is already happening is visa services, right? So the final approval will be done there. Okay, they don't even, but everything else will be done here. Okay, the processing, the checking, etc., and then you send it there, and they'll approve the visa. Many things like that. Okay, so demographic decline in advanced countries, demand for high skill migrants will probably continue, but many other things, the medium skills, etc., which I'm talking about. The role for business is that regulations. We have to look at the regulations. By the way, if any of your professors are interested in working on this area, I'll be happy to, take that up with you. Green area, I just want to say, because I'm sure I don't want you to get totally bored. I'll just mention 2 things here. This is another area which, in a way, climate change, etc., is going to be with us. But I see this as a third aspect which will not really get going before the other 2 which I mentioned, right? But I just want to mention we have a holistic, diversified portfolio approach, partly because there's so much uncertainty. If people are interested, we can discuss this, but I want to mention life, holistic when I say lifestyle for environment. So it's not just solar power, which I mentioned, e-transport. We had a seminar here in Goa. I was here a couple of months ago, and Goa seems to be doing pretty well on that. Mobility, but lifestyle for environment, millet. Again, maybe, I don't know if I have a few, do I have some time? I'll tell a story. Huh? Okay. So I'll tell a little story. So, somebody was making a presentation on agriculture. So because I'm macroeconomic economist, I have to look at everything and see if it all makes sense overall. So somebody mentioned that, and this we've talked about for ages. Wheat and rice, we are over-dependent. We don't have coarse grains, we used to call them. I mean, I have looked after PDF 30 years ago or something, 20 years. We used to discuss this. So somebody says, but we should produce millets. We should double, triple, quadruple our production of millets. I said, where is the demand? Okay, you keep talking about supply side, who's going to buy it? And then you have this incredible campaign by the Prime Minister himself. Okay, and you created the demand. How? Now, every dinner, I have only millet chapatis. By the way, there are kind of 15 different kinds. I finally settled on 2 or 3 of them just. But you can have any of them. I have the chapati. I no longer have wheat chapatis at dinner. Okay? This half joke, half whatever. But lifestyle is important. That's the point I'm making. The holistic thinking is not, okay? So that's our approach. Okay. That's the broad view. Now, where is it all getting us? So what I have is a couple of slides, just to give you an idea, which you may want to focus on if you have questions. So here I've got, this is per capita income, but I don't give absolute. As somebody who's been forecasting macro and growth for, I don't know, 50 years, I can't think in numbers. You'll hear 10 trillion, 20 trillion. I just cannot do it. I'm sorry. Maybe it's something wrong with me. But I think in terms of, so I find it easier to say, okay, relative to somebody. So I'm giving you relative to China. That's something I can focus on. So roughly we were at the bottom of that curve. Remember, this is our per capita GDP in PPP terms, which is the only way, if somebody wants to argue, I can argue on that, to compare average income of countries relative to China. So India's per capita GDP relative to China, and we are somewhere at the bottom. It doesn't matter. But what you can see is that's roughly a little less than 40%. Okay, our per capita GDP, and therefore you can assume our average welfare is a little less than 40% of the average Chinese. Okay. So what I've done here is I've given 4 different projections, which have a very precise number, because that's how it came up. My purpose was not to do 3 projections, but I did the main projection and then I did plus minus, very frankly, because people always say, oh, you've given 1. What does that mean? So I gave 4, right? So the middle one, the green one, is a GDP growth. You can add population growth, etc. Which population you just take from UN projections. No need point in getting into it, because you can't change that much if it is correct, if the projection is correct. So in my view, if you take the middle projection, which is just 6.4% real GDP growth, okay. This is why I don't like, every time people will talk about nominal growth. I frankly, I don't know how to project nominal growth. Are you talking about 30 years, 50 years? I mean, you got to make wild assumption. When you are talking about growth, I know, I have studied growth in Southeast Asia, all across the world. I know how that works. I don't know how nominal numbers work. I'm sorry. Inflation can be anything. Okay. Exchange rate can go all over the place. So for me, it's too arbitrary. I mean, some people may be better than I am. Okay, so what does it tell you? What this shows is we can discuss that later, but I'm going to finish. According to the standard World Bank definition of upper middle income country and high income, I translate that into per capita GDP at PPP. And according to that definition, we'll be an upper middle income country in that middle projection by 2030. And by roughly 2047, we'll be a high income country. We can discuss that further, but let me finish the rest of it. The second part, again, where you can say I have my unique way of doing things, the way I look at social indicators is to plot them against per capita GDP, the same per capita GDP. So in my way of looking at things, these things are all connected. Okay, that's my macro vision for growth. There are many different, again, issues with short-term macro. So what do we have here? I've got a curve fitted, which you can see from there, or maybe you can't, has an R squared of 0.7, where we take all the countries which have a life expectancy and plot it, and then say, where is India? So India is that first on the left, that red dot, which is just below the dotted line. So we are slightly worse in terms of life expectancy. You can think of as a summary measure of the health of the country. Okay, that's the one measure which kind of, if you want just one measure, it captures the overall. Obviously, it doesn't capture all the details. So according to this, we have to move up by 2031. We must be at that dot, that next dot, which should be purple, but it's hardly visible, is that upper middle income, right? And I've given you the numbers from there. So we got to move from 67 to 71, and then to the next dot, which is the upper middle income, to 76. So in some sense, one can take all the social indicators, which I'm just doing, almost completed, but I don't want to bore you with all the numbers. And we must achieve at least the corresponding years in that, whether it's mortality or whatever else, okay? So that's how I would look at social indicators, okay? That gives us a target. Then, of course, you can translate it to states, etc., etc. I wanted to give you a little bit of table. Remember, I was emphasizing public health, water, sanitation. Okay, this is another bugbear of mine for the last 15, 20 years. And I'll point out, you know, if you look at the green there and the red, the green tells you where we are on or better than the lines. So each of these indicators, we do the same thing. Remember that plot? Per capita GDP and whatever it is, as many countries available, and to the line. There's nothing else I can do. And the life expectancy at the bottom, we can discuss it if you later, but forget that for the moment. But it's all in the green now, latest data, except for urban safely managed sanitation services and urban open defecation. Does that shock anybody? It's not rural, it's urban. Can anybody guess? There are 5 of you here. Oh, why is it urban and not rural? There's a reason. Can you think of something? How come? Slums, exactly. It's the slums. Okay. Spears, who did a paper before me on sanitation and malnutrition, showed that he was shocked that the biggest malnutrition was in urban slums. I'm sure you've been to a slum. Some of the ladies there, have any of you been to a slum? Oh, youngsters. Huh? What do you think is the issue there? Yeah, there's open sewers. Yeah, and when it rains, it's all over the place. Okay? That's deadly. That's deadly for malnutrition, and we can discuss it later. Okay, so I just want to leave that, and I want to read this statement. Okay, and I'll finish with that. I'll go into conclusions. You've already got the conclusion, and we can start the discussion. So, what is this? The point here is you hear about Atmanirbhar Bharat, but the Prime Minister has made very clear the goal is global quality and competitiveness. Yes, we want to produce ourselves. We will do whatever we can to do it, but we must achieve global quality. The interesting thing is that's exactly the lesson I learned in growth theory from studying Southeast Asia and Korea and so on. Okay. The Atmanirbhar or whatever their version of it was works when you make sure you have developed the quality and competitiveness. Okay. And the statement, this is, I'm taking verbatim because I cannot express it better. This is an interview that the Prime Minister gave, probably his first major interview, to the FT of London. And it says, we aspire to create conditions where everyone sees value in being in India to invest and expand their operations here. We envision a system where anyone from around the world feels at home in India, where our processes and standards are familiar and welcoming. That is the inclusive global standard we aspire to build. Thank you.
Those who have joined online, I will request that the questions that you have, if you kindly write in chat, so that we take up these questions. Meanwhile, we'll start discussing, but we'll welcome the questions from the online audience. Please write in the chat so that we take up those questions one by one.
If there are any questions, those online could kindly post it in the chat. I can see that there is one.
Yeah. From the audience, yeah. Go ahead. Let's start with your question.
Because I think it was your second slide. So it was regarding the China. I have the query regarding the China. Currently, the working age population is around 20.1% or something, and it is expected to decline in 2050 means 2050. But regarding for us, it is 18.3 and it is expected to be 18.6 in 2050. Means a very, very small increase we are observing in 2020 compared to 2050. So what is the reason in China? What is happening? Because 2050 means not 2050, 2050, it is expected to decline. And you can see that a large decline happening. Is it because of the demographic transition? Means maybe because of the aging population?
Yeah, so thank you. Yeah, should I answer one by one? Okay. So the numbers I have, which are taken from the UN latest projections, just read them out for others. Yeah, you have the numbers, but others may want to know that 2020 there
20 point
was 20.1 share in world thing. So it's divided by the total working age population in the world as projected by UN, and it'll go down to 12.3%. And this is obviously, and now everybody recognizes, due to their one-child policy. But you know, the thing we know from many other countries, and I'm sure you know, is that once you start on this process and you push the people, they no longer want to go back. So that's what's happened in China. They had this policy, they forced everybody to have one child, or exception some and two children in rural areas and certain others. But now they've changed the policy, but it's going to have little or no effect. We know that from many other countries which have tried to reverse the policy, it has marginal effects. So that one is you know, as I said, I go by UN projections. There's no value to making new projections because we are just talking about trends. So what that shows actually is the highest decline in the share is from China, which is minus 7.8 of the global working age population.
Sir, but there is only a nominal increase happening in within that India also from 18.3
the
to
point is again
18.6
not
something.
The point here was what I've shown is 0.3. So it's a nominal increase in the share, world share. And part of the reason is that the big population growth is going to happen in Africa. So but they are not listed here because they are not really, in my context, which is the next 15 to 30 years, they are not really big competitors for us. We are trying to give you here the countries which are complementary or potential competitors. So Africa, maybe by 2050, will come into the competitive frame for us, but right now it's not relevant, but they are the ones who are going to see the big increase in shares.
Okay, thank you, sir.
One second. Yeah, thanks. Okay, so let me raise some of the questions based on the chat and also what we have in mind. You know, I'll raise first a very technical question. See, a growth at about 6.5, 6.9, which you mentioned, may not be enough to raise India to a developed economy status. And it's not just a linear projection of income and so on at that growth. My point is 6.4, 6.5 may be unstable in the sense that, you know, today you have something like a 4% productivity change, improvement possible in what we call the organized sector, in almost all sectors other than agriculture. Okay, coming from technology, coming from a whole host of factors, including AI. So in other words, if we have to absorb our labor, the labor force that you're talking about, we need to probably grow at around 10 plus, because otherwise at 6.4 will give you perhaps a 2.4% increase in employment per year, because 4% will be absorbed by a mere technological factor. Okay, and when I say mere technological factor, the technological factor which, and along with which goes the investment requirements. So in other words, if I were to kind of break up the growth into in the standard format, then the labor productivity, that means the output per unit of labor with technology, with capital formation and so on, increased capital use, is going to be of the order of 4% per annum. So the output by labor will grow at 4%. Okay, so if so, then you need to grow at 10.5% and maybe 9%. And why am I saying this? Because one of the observations of history is that the later a country started the process of industrialization, or let's say economic transformation, the faster its growth has been. So if you kind of stack England, France, Germany, Japan, the Nordic countries, and then of course post-World War II, China, the East Asian countries, they all increased their growth rates. China being really the case of a 10%, but it was not exceptional because Japan did that for a fairly long period from the end of World War II. So my point is this, late industrialization goes with high growth. Why are we pitching this low growth? Low growth would be unstable. Low growth could perhaps, create that bit of improvement, but create massive identity crisis and conflict. That's question one. Okay. Question two is, almost all late industrializing countries, 20th century industrializations, did what I would call major inclusion, strategies, which happened either through land reforms, typically through land reforms, but also massive inclusion through upfront inclusion through education and the state taking care of healthcare. Now, driblet inclusion, what I mean by driblet is, the state doing A, then B, subsidies and so on. Is that going to be stable? Is that going to be sustainable? Okay. And is that within the competence of the state? Wouldn't that get overwhelmed by corruption and other things, which has been the kind of norm in India? I mean, it's not that we have not had inclusion, but barring maybe MNREGS and a few others, like Skill India and so on, the kind of actual effective inclusion has been rather weak. Okay. A question which has come from the audience.
Sorry, that's a huge question.
Okay, so maybe, and then I'll raise the urban and the other question. Let me just put the urban question. Can we really have this growth without a significant increase in urbanization, maybe 60%? Okay. And if the urbanization has to be 60%, doesn't it require a major change in so-called, planning? We seem to be caught in this absurd thing called master planning, which has reduced the per capita built-up space in urban areas, created massive confusion between, let us say, articulation infrastructure and layout and land use. It's only in India that we plan with FSIs of 1, which is absurd. And the result is highest densities, people densities in urban areas and very low built-up densities. Okay, so people live literally in prison-like spaces, and that's part of the problem of Swachh Bharat and cleanliness and so on. So wouldn't it need a very major urban structural change and reforms? Okay, yeah, and then what do you think? And this is a specific question to you. What do you think of PPPs, public-private partnerships? Okay, yeah. So these are some of the questions which come out.
So don't mind my answers because they are just what I want to do is just to give you by way of background where I'm coming from. I've spent the last 15 months since I joined catching up. In 1999. I wrote a volume which is still available on the IGRO website, where I laid out a policy path for the 21st century. Okay. So, and now I've been out of it for 15 years, right? So what I wanted to see was, what is it that has happened since then, which I'm not aware of? That's how I make policy. Okay. So, there's a lot of things which I've come across, and I'm going to, in a way, use your question to say a little bit about that, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay. So let me start. Yeah, the technical one, of course, we can debate, but I'll just tell you a few what comes to my mind. China is the only country, which has had almost 10% for 30 to 35 years. There is no other country in history.
Japan did
Japan
47
actually,
to 64.
sorry, for 35 years.
Not as much, but
Right.
Japan did that from.
Yeah, I'm not disputing a thing. I'm
50
just
to
giving
60. Yeah,
additional
sure.
information.
Right.
Because you have to understand where I'm coming
Yeah.
from now. I'm not disputing. That's why I said don't mind.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to argue. It doesn't, there is no simple answer. So that you take as given. What you're saying is a fact, but I'm going to, so the two others which are prominent is South Korea and Thailand. Okay. Thailand, South Korea had two spurts. Okay. They had a high growth spurt, then they fell, then they revived it. Thailand had a high growth spell. So the basically, to my memory, again, my memory is now getting a little vague, but these were the three. There was perhaps one I'm forgetting because I don't remember the exact numbers. So my first point would be that Taiwan, the old days we used to know the island economies, Hong Kong, Singapore, none of them had 9% for 10 to 20 years. Okay, it was just sustained, fast growth. Okay, so there are examples of that, but there are also others. And we really have to see from our perspective, and I'm giving you my perspective. It's not a but you raise several other points. If I understood you rightly, are you saying total factor productivity of 4%?
No,
not
total,
TFP.
Not TFP.
So when we are talking about labor productivity, obviously the investment will matter.
Right.
The more the investment, the faster will be the labor productivity growth and the productivity growth. I have not done the numbers because my perspective, of course, Dr. Goldar has done these numbers. I don't remember him saying ever, but that may be true. So I don't want to get into the exact number needed, but what I've just showed you right here, these facts I can assert. Okay, in the last 7 years, we have grown at a GDP growth of an average, which people say is between around 6 plus minus. Okay, yet our labor force participation rate has increased. Okay? So that's a fact.
It was actually bouncing back to its original.
No, this is a trend. And what Dr. Goldar's precise work has shown, actually, what is bounced back, that's very interesting for the ladies who are listening. The labor force participation rate actually declined dramatically, and it has now recovered to its peak earlier. That's the new data he's showing.
That's right.
Female labor force participation rate.
Yeah. That even the PLF is certain. And also Niti Aayog working paper by Professor Ramesh Chand shows that after COVID, during COVID, and also 2 years, like last 3 years, they will able to participate in that. And it has recovered from the lowest level that it reached around 19 to 20%. Now it is back to 24%. However, even in that working paper, even the PLF's data, if you dig deep, to find that those increases happen in agriculture. So
See,
going back
that's why I don't not quoting Niti. I am quoting the exact data, and I'm quoting Professor Goldar, who, by the way, I have great respect for. That whole CLEMS database is his. So any discussion of supply side has to go to his data. Because you can't do it in any other.
It's based on PLF's data.
I'm coming to PLFS. So what I am talking about is when I say that the long-term trend is his data is the decline, the labor force, female labor force participation, the bottom occurred around 2017 or earlier. He's not talking about pandemic. Okay, we can discuss the pandemic, but I think that's a red herring because I am talking about what will happen in 2035 and 2047. I cannot get stuck in this thing. You know, you can just look at that graph. You take the highest peak and say, oh, we are down here. It depends, that's not the point. You can look at the graph I've given and you can find 2 points where you're worse off. That's pandemic. I don't care. I'm talking about long-term trends. What is feasible? What is happening? What Goldar has shown is that the female labor force participation from its bottom in history, okay, from 2011, it went down. Okay, we're talking about long term. We're not talking about pandemic.
Since 2000.
And now it is almost at the same level as the peak. Okay, so now the more important point is you are saying, why am I aiming for? I'm not aiming for it. I am just saying that in my view, and we can get into it later. What I am saying is that 6.4% growth, and then we'd have to discuss how I get this UIC, etc. Right? I'm just talking about a specific goal. You can. The question of employment is I have not given any employment numbers for the future. Now, if you're, which is correct argument, you can say, okay, what's going to happen to employment? Fine, I have not done it. So in that sense, I would have to come back and use the CLEMS data and say, okay, what is the productivity? What is that? But I warned you that I am not doing planning here. If I was doing planning, I have to give all the demand side, I have to give all the supply side, but I'm not trying to do that. Okay. I am trying to say these are the trends. This is the role of the government. This is the role of private sector. We are not in an era of planning. It's not going to happen. You are quite right to question that if we just do this, we will fail. Okay. I mean, that's fair point. I have not answered that. Okay. So, I have studied long-term growth, but there is not much data on, yeah, one more point, sorry. That is a very important point. I have looked carefully at the manufacturing, okay? And the history, this is from papers, it's not my own analysis. This is paper, there's tons of papers now on the manufacturing share. So what does it show? It shows that every country in the world had a curve of manufacturing value added. Every means 90%, I don't know, 99%, whatever, then maybe you'll find one. India is actually that one. That had a value added share and a employment share which goes up, which peaks and then declines. Sure. The interesting part of it is Europe is the standard. Latin America had an earlier and lower peak. Okay, please note this if you are going to worry about manufacturing, employment, and value added and employment. Latin America had a lower and earlier peak than Europe. Asia, Southeast Asia, which we all want to emulate in some sense, had a higher and later peak. What happened to India? We didn't have a peak. Again, I'm talking about long-term trends. Remember, I'm trying to get to 2050. I'm not talking about tomorrow or 3 years from now. India, if you look at this long-term, plateaued out. Okay, it did not have a peak. And if you look more carefully, it has kind of a wavy thing. So you can say anything. You can take a little wave up there and a wave here and say it's declining. No, you can take a wave here and you'll say it is rising. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the long-term trend. And what I am saying is, this is our last opportunity to get that peak. I have analyzed it. It's the policies we followed. Those policies have been removed. Now we are setting up a new structure. So what is the assumption I'm making? I am assuming that certainly we will not get the employment which the country, Southeast Asia got. Obviously not. That I 100% agree with you. It's not going to be the same level of employment, which they may have seen. But I'm sure you're not saying, but I would disagree strongly by saying that it will not raise the employment rate. It will raise your manufactured export. That's the whole idea of the supply chain shift. And that supply chain shift is going to be the labor intensive. We must make sure it is.
If we can
so
get
why should it not generate employment? I don't know.
See, if we can get manufacturing right, okay, we can have explosive growth. I agree.
Explosive we have to 5.9 keh raha hu, 6.4.
6.4 ne usse zyada ho sakta.
Okay, theek hai. If you can produce that, that's great.
No, the argument is simple. See, if you get the engine of growth around manufacturing right, remember, we are the last bastion of low-cost labor on any.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Much of the rest
I don't think
of the world is richer than
okay, we
us.
have argued finer points. If we get higher, that's great. I don't, yeah.
Right?
Okay,
I don't
let me,
think-
but you got 3 other points.
Yeah,
So,
so
so the next one is
PPP.
inclusion. Okay.
Yeah, inclusion.
There is 2 parts of the strategy. Perhaps it was not clear. One is basic welfare, Antodaya, what I call. Okay. And the second is empowerment. Empowerment means the skilling. It means the basic education. I think it's living in dreamland to think of higher education for all when these people cannot read. That's all the point I'm making. I'm not making this point against you. I'm making against people I've been arguing against for 30 years.
Yeah.
Everybody seems to think, we must have everybody in higher education. No, please get them to read.
Yeah.
Okay, that's my point. You do that, other things will happen. Okay, but this thing will not happen by itself. We have to make sure that is the government job. So I'm just trying to focus it on issues which I think are important. That doesn't mean everything else is not important. Okay. So if Professor Saab is an old friend, I mean, Professor Morris, I know from macro. He was one of the few macro economists I used to, when I was CA and before that even actually. Anyway, so it's not, I'm not arguing against you. I'm making a point which, from my perspective, people must be clear. Okay. I understand the middle class wants credentials. You want BA. I did too for my children. So I'm not arguing against that. But my job is now to make sure these poor people in the rural areas get a job.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's all a matter of perspective. That's my job right now. It's not a question of me whether I'm moral or immoral or what. That's not it. I have to make sure. So the question is, the point is, that's right. The health, what is basic health? What I am trying to argue, which I've been arguing for 20 years, is please make sure that sanitation is right. You keep talking about all kinds of high things. By the way, this analysis shows, by the way, life expectancy, female life expectancy, we are below that line. So we know, I mean, you can identify with this simple analysis that is the problem. See, it is not male life expectancy. It's female. And then you look a little further, you find it is mortality. Female mortality. What is happening?
On inclusion.
So we have to focus on that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Let me just add the question there.
Yeah.
See, I'm not disputing anything that you said. All I'm saying is, I'm asking the question how a little bit more closely.
Yeah.
Okay. Not, the objectives that, let's say, we need HDI, and a lot of the HDI will happen as we go along with income, is all fine. In fact, income is a very important determinant of HDI. If you look at actually globally or within India, income and income distribution alone explains a very large part of the FDI in India. The residual FDI, okay, or its deviation from that, can actually be explained in terms of efficacy of government action. So let me put the point somewhat like this. There are certain indicators like adult life expectancy, which can improve with very little, or where the comparative advantage or the role of the government is much less. However, for child mortality, cleanliness, what we call morbidity, which is no longer reported, for infant mortality, for literacy, okay, the role of the state becomes very, very crucial. Now, if you take a global picture and do the same graph that you did, then India typically falls below the line, given its below the line.
On what indicator?
On indicators like below, in the sense it does worse on those indicators where the state has a comparative advantage. And where the state does not have where the private sector or families themselves can do it, we lie above the line. So above the line in the sense we do better than what the regression line would tell us. So what one is trying to say is that there is a huge income inequality and or state performance, issue. Now, if you look at income inequality, apparently India's income inequality is not too bad. So therefore, it must be the state. So the state weakness in public service delivery is a huge limitation in inclusion. I mean, we can waste all.
So I don't think we are
How-
disagreeing here.
Yeah, how would you do that is the question.
So I have
Yeah.
already, if I may refer
Yeah.
you to the question.
Any
because we went
insights?
through, the whole point of that section on welfare and public goods, which I went over quickly.
Yeah.
Because we know there are a number of World Bank studies which I saw before I retired, which showed that the provision of public goods, classic public goods, was unequal. The whole point of emphasizing water, sanitation, which I pointed out, is to make sure that public goods and what I call quasi-public goods are equally distributed. My second point was just saying it doesn't matter. Why? Because we've had primary health centers from 1971.
Correct.
So why is it unequal? It is not new. It's not that we haven't done it. We've been doing it for 50 years. There's secondary health centers in every state. They started in 71. It's 23. 50 years. Why? What my focus is to make sure that doesn't happen for another 50 years. And what I am saying is that if we follow the same method, we will not have it for 50 years. What we need is hybrid systems, okay? For health, for education, that's what I'm saying. That's where the debate should be. The debate is not that if I had tons of money and if I could tell state what to do, I can order them. I cannot. Health is a state subject. I cannot order them, okay? Education was a state subject for till 90 something. It is now on the concurrent list. We still cannot order them to say what to do in a school, okay? So what I am trying to say is, okay, what is it that we can do?
You're saying IT may.
And what I am saying is that IT is critical as far as these two subjects are concerned.
Right.
Now, there's still several, PPP, there's no doubt. I'll give you an example. But let me finish. You said urbanization. Okay. Urbanization, employment, skilling, again, in the long-term sense. In the short-term sense, there are tons of people, you know, you can keep arguing. My job is long-term. Okay. Make sure the policies are right. So as far as urbanization, it's my topic, but it's a state. Okay. I have 5 opposition states. I'm giving a personal example because it's hard to, it's easier to convey. You know, I can talk theory for 10 hours. You will not understand what the earth I'm talking. I have 5 opposition states. They don't want to meet me. Okay. I am saying I am an economist. I want to work with you. I am not here on behalf of Mr. Modi. I am a member of the Planning Commission. I've worked with 5 prime ministers, 5 finance ministers. I am just want to talk. Nobody is interested. So what's the point? Point is, urbanization is very hard to do. So what I am trying to think of is, what is it that I can do? Okay. So what I have found is, and this is where that skill thing comes in, the example. There's a program called Drishti, which is not Drishti, Diksha, which is an amazing program. And all we had to do was we had to get an NGO or PPP, exactly that. We got an NGO and they developed it. I mean, we just had to provide encouragement, and I'm hoping to try and do the same for urban. The thing is that we talk about master planning. There is no planning department in 90% of the states. There are 3 people in one state. There are 10 people. There is nothing. Okay, so my problem is how to make sure there are planners there first. Then to shift the focus, bring economics into it. Okay, not just master planning, not just saying that they will be there. No economic content.
Right.
Third, it's now regional. If you look at the night lights, it's all spines. You know, look at the night light, you look at the urban areas, it's all growing on the spines. You look at a picture 10 years apart. It's not happening in the urban area. So we have to do regional. So all these issues are here. All I'm trying to say is urbanization is terribly difficult, but we have to think about it. What can we do? And that's why I said, don't please take offense, because all this stuff I've learned only in the 12 months and only because people have to talk, because I have a position. That's why, otherwise I would never have known, frankly. Believe me, that's my big advantage. That's the advantage I have being in this thing. I mean, I'm not arguing against anything you say. Okay, it's just that And PPP, yes. Okay, let me give you the skills example. And that will explain the approach. Again, I'm not trying to argue against you. The approach, see, what I have discovered on skilling is that you have to divide it into 3 parts. The high skill is profitable. The private sector will do it. Okay. I have found companies which are doing this for international companies. Okay. Indian companies who are doing the skilling for international agents and everybody. Obviously, India also, they will do if you want. At the bottom level, there is nobody because it's not profitable. That's my focus. Okay. In the middle, there is a combination, NGOs, etc. That's the tough part. Okay. At the bottom level, we have to do. Okay. Because it's not profitable. Okay. So either you have to give some money. So PPP is absolutely essential in any kind of social activity. So that 100% I agree with you. That was your point. I think we should move on. There must be some other questions. Yeah, aap boliye, please.
Imports, especially from the US, in increasing our export or increasing our production. So my question is that there are plenty of empirical studies which say the same. Even my own PhD work says the same. And since 2015, we had a foreign trade policy that is also incentivizes imports which are going towards exports. We have advanced authorization scheme and various other schemes within the foreign trade policy. So since this is something which government has agreed and has been following from the past 10 years, yet why we are not still seen that miraculous growth in the exports? What else do we need to do?
So let me, again, if this is a wider question, it's very important to understand. See, global trade, 2/3 of world trade, and I'm interested in the export side, not the imports, and I'll come to, there are 3 parts to your question. Let me start with one. So what we know is that 2/3 of global trade occurs within MNE, MNC supply chains. So till a few years ago, we were competing for that 1/3 share against everybody. 1/3 of total trade. We are desperately competing. We were totally out of MNC supply chains. So the first part of the strategy is, if we still want to do manufacturing, we have to get into those supply chains. Okay, that's the first simple conclusion. The second is what people don't realize. You will hear, people you think Bloomberg, let me name, because they write such silly articles that I have to mention it. They are saying, oh, Vietnam is our competitor. Vietnam has an FTA with EU. You know what advantage they get versus India? 12.5%. I have talked to electronics manufacturers and exporters, including Apple, etc. That is huge. You talk about infrastructure differences or anything, there's nothing compared to 12.5%. Straight away, by an FTA, they have a 12.5% advantage. They pay 0 taxes, tariff, we pay 12.5. So that's the second thing. The FTA is not just something. It is to remove a competitive disadvantage which we have. So we must have that FTA with EU and get the same treatment. That's the second point. The third point is, again, because I had to rush through it, probably you didn't get it. The MNCs are, why have they taken 2/3 of the trade? Because they are not just MNCs for export-import. They bring in FDI, they bring in management skills, they bring in technology. Technology we think of as some kind of a machine. What is shown is more important is the organization, the management, they do the skilling. The quality of the skills goes up. And it's not only for their own company. Once people see, some of these guys leave and go to another company. Okay, somebody will hire you away. So it's the skilling which is as important, if not. They train you because they have tens and tens of years experience in 20 different countries. Okay, so that is the answer to your question. Exports is not just about exports. It's about FDI, it's about FTA, everything which is interconnected with it.
See, let's pick that, because I think one of the great suggestions you have made, which any sensible economist should have made long time ago, is that FTAs with rich countries can never be to our disadvantage. And I think it's a wonderful suggestion. Some of us have been arguing, I think Professor Ravindra Dholakia, for instance, was one of the earliest to argue that we must form an FTA with the US. Okay? And so, but I'll still hang on and I'll say the following. See, I think without that, with doing that, we should be able to speed up our exports in a great way. Okay.
By the way, USA doesn't want an FTA.
Yeah,
so
but
it's like this.
so US may not want, but but Europe, if it's willing to accept it, England, if it's willing to accept it, these can be great things. But there are 2 or 3 things which come in. Okay. One is, would our electronics really bounce that heavily without us doing something about our membership of the ITA, which prevents us from giving that initial tariff push to a lot of electronic products. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2 is, all these countries which had a huge export-led growth undervalued their exchange rates. Okay, so Indian exchange rates are, I won't say they're overvalued, but they are valued so as to have a current account deficit which is no more than 1-2%. Okay. However, given the great advantage that we have on services exports, namely IT and also remittance, which bridges it, it leaves us with a trade deficit of around 8-10%. Okay. So if we take credit in our balance of payments management for what I would think the factor side that operates, namely remittance and IT, which is neo factor, the manufacturing side, which comes out of an engine of growth, is disabled to that extent. This I would call a kind of new, Dutch disease of sorts. Now, shouldn't it therefore point immediately to a strategic macroeconomic policy by which I undervalue the currency so that the trade deficit comes down and the exports on services do kick in the same way, leaves us with a current account surplus actually. So without that, this bounding exports, how is it going to happen? And this is exactly what China did. They always undervalued their currency.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, shouldn't therefore we look at some kind of a strategic initiative? I agree fully that the first thing
you have a good
do
point.
is
We will
that
discuss.
FTA,
We will discuss.
is FTAs with the countries.
I've got. You have a very valid point.
Yeah.
It's a. But I have taken it on advisement.
Yeah.
I would like to.
What is your point?
This is a serious question which I'm not sure how many people here in the audience still want to discuss, but I will discuss it.
Yeah.
But is there any other question from from the audience? Let me take. I have noted it. I'm not going to ignore it. I'm going to come back.
Anything here.
But let's just keep them involved a little bit, no? Otherwise, they'll go away.
Yeah.
Let's have a few lighter.
Which
It's
are
a
those?
very serious
Okay.
question.
There is a question. Yeah.
So let's have one or
as
two
an
of the
earlier
popular
this is
questions.
from Devendra Mathur, whom you may know, he was of course director of Exim Bank and
नहीं बताइए question क्या है? हाँ.
so as a distinguished member of Niti Aayog, do you see a greater role for deepening the access to trade finance for boosting India's exports, especially project exports? Okay, so just hold it there because there's another question.
And then,
Thank you for a nice presentation. It's looking like 2 parts of the world, West and East, moving from offshoring to friendshoring.
Correct.
To secure the supply chain. Under such a situation, what would be the optimum policy for the Indian economy to friendshore the supply chain with the Western or Eastern part? Is it with the Western or the Eastern part? If it is not possible to offshore with both parts of it.
Yeah. So that's.
So I think.
I'll start with that, and I'll come to some of
really,
yours.
Yeah.
Which I have no disagreement. It's a tough question. So question means tough in a technical sense, not. So let me start with the this optimal policy. So what I have tried to show first demographically that the demographic problem, if you mean East as China and Russia, their problem is the worst actually. If you look at their numbers, the closest is probably Japan and maybe 1 or 2 European countries, Italy or something. So demographically, there is no contest. Believe me. Okay. Then you look at economics. What I showed you were 2 or 3 things which are directly relevant to us. FDI, number of MNCs, and manufactured imports. Because I don't care how much exports they have. If I am going to have efficient manufacturing, I have to be able to sell manufacturers to them. Okay. So in all those areas, the US is the top. Let us recognize it. The age of, a policy based on Marxist socialist rhetoric is over. Okay. They are the most, when we say superpower, I don't agree with their policies, for example, on East Pakistan, in 71, but that's not the issue here. The issue here is economics. Do we want to become an upper middle income country? Do we want to become, by the way, that I had to tell you, so let me do that now. I am not talking about developed countries. I am using a very technical definition purely in terms of numbers. My numbers may be wrong, but please be clear. I'm just taking a number. I am not saying what else is developed, undeveloped, or what. That's an impossible question in my view. So I'm just taking a technical number as defined by World Bank, translating it into PPP. That thing you may question, but just using numbers. That's it. Whether it's developed in every dimension, whether you have a middle class, I'm not looking into that. I don't have, in a 1 hour chat, I don't have time to do that. So back to your question. So there is absolutely no question. I've given you numbers that the East will be like 1/10 of the West, as I've defined it in simple terms, not everybody. The second thing is that there is a geopolitical imperative, which I thought I was going to talk about. I'm glad I didn't, because we would have had no time left. Is a fact of life. I don't know if you forget it, but there is a country which has attacked us 3 years ago. They've been doing it for years. We had a previous crisis in 2017. They've been nibbling at our territory for the last 20 years. Forget 1962. So what is the choice? I don't understand how anybody can ask me. I'm sorry. I'm not, again, trying to discourage you. Yeah. You've given a question which is useful, because everybody must understand. We have no choice of going to China. We don't have a choice. Right. Okay, so who is there? Russia was too small. Till the 1/10 of our own size. In terms of economy, in the war effort, they've increased a little bit more or something. So that's not a choice. Okay, could I come to your?
No, there's one more question.
Then we'll come back.
Can I ask Mr. Nankumar to raise his question?
Hello, can you hear me clearly?
Nankumar,
yeah. Please put your video if you can, but anyway, just raise the question.
No, I won't, because it will crunch the bandwidth.
Okay, go ahead.
First of all, I reserve time specially for this because you are a man of ideas, and we have been following Niti Aayog very, very professionally as scientist also, but we are totally disappointed with the type of scenarios which government of India is building based on some optimistic scenarios. These are not correct, because in my long experience of research in field and lab and teaching and reading also, I can tell you that we need a critical national resource knowledge base, which is insufficient at the moment. It doesn't look at natural resource economics or systematic assessment also of our biological wealth. So basically, we need scenarios. For example, you mentioned that till 2047, life expectancy is X and Y, but basically, people will be talking about death expectancy in 2048, because there is already talk of mankind moving towards immortality or death by choice, because that is the type of quantum leap the technology is likely to take in biomedical fields because of the expansion of artificial intelligence and humanoid robots and all these things. Besides, my basic fear, which basically we discuss when environmental economists and scientists sit together, is, are we aware about the tipping points which our own country is reaching, and are they factored in all these negative externalities in our current pricing models or say macroeconomic models, or we are simply brushing them off. These are several tipping points, including, that microplastic to massive soil erosion and so far the ecological, ecotoxicity levels of our rivers and all this. So by discounting all this means what type of growth? Is there a proper resource audit? Is there a proper audit of our real growth? Because the parameter of real growth, as far as I could see, is that any civilization will grow, expand, and develop if we judiciously and sustainably use natural resources along with the human resources, along with the intellectual resources of these human resources. But is our model, and we do not need to be certified that we are this economy or that economy. We are not in a competition. So my question
I
to
think
you,
we've
sir,
got
is
your question.
my question is we should have different types of future scenarios based on different types of futures.
Sure. Sure. Okay. So I'll
Yeah.
propose the question to Dr. Vim.
Yeah. Let me repeat again what I said. The Planning Commission was abolished in 2014. Whether you agree with that reason or not, I didn't abolish it. I really wouldn't like to pursue that because it's a political and it's a big question above what we are talking about here. And secondly, I am not giving a Niti view. The Niti view is going to come out hopefully either before the election or after the election. So in the next 6 months. Okay. This is my view. Okay. One person. Okay. That's it. Nobody else has helped me. I don't have the whole Niti view of 600 people working for me. Okay. This is my view. That's number 2. Number 3, it's very conventional. You're right. People are saying GDP, there's all this GDP which every country in the world measures, UN, all thing we apply is all BS without accounting for natural resource. You have a valid point, but that again is beyond my competence. I am not able to tell the UN now, force everybody to switch over to having a adjusted sea. That does not mean that exhaustion is not possible. That does not mean that I mentioned, I have one slide on climate change and energy. Those are certainly valid issues and should be discussed in detail. My impression is that's the area where is actually being discussed the most in this country. You know why? Because there's huge amount of financing coming from outside sources. So if you tell me that not enough thought is going into it, I cannot see it. My problem is not enough thought is going into issues which I am talking about.
Right.
Sanitation, skilling, it's a huge, huge issue in my view. You know, my son has a job, but there are hundreds of thousands of people in the rural who can't get a job. I think that's a hugely important issue. Anyway, let's
taking on this particular thing,
right.
There are people waiting to get absorbed in the rural areas. So suppose as you were talking about,
but should we come to his issue? नहीं आप बोलिए, नहीं आप पहले बोलिए, then we'll.
The point here is that suppose you're talking about a long-term group, not a kind of a up and down in the last 5-6 years.
Right.
So if you look at the long-term growth over the years, if you look at the sectoral distribution of income, it followed the development trajectory. The contribution of primary sector gone down, secondary has gone up, but plateaued, as you say, and tertiary sector is now the highest. Yeah. But if you look at the occupational transformation, that did not follow this sectoral transformation. So there is a disconnect between the structural sectoral distribution and the occupational distribution. So even if agriculture is now producing around 14% of the GDP, it has more than 42% of the labor force still engaged in.
Right.
That it has more than 3 times the labor force it should have. Like if you look at the US kind of
absolutely.
US 1890 to 1980
Correct.
shifted its agricultural labor force to the manufacturing initially and then through servicing.
Right.
India last 75 years, if you look at the trend, it could shift from agriculture to manufacturing and tertiary, mostly tertiary service-led growth. But still the occupational distribution is very skewedly biased towards agriculture. So we have
Right.
disguised unemployment that poor people are talking about in rural areas. They want to get absorbed in meaningful jobs in the urban areas, in manufacturing, in tertiary sector, which they are not getting. That is why we have such a huge
Absolutely.
informal urban sector, where people are mostly self-employed. So in such a situation,
Mhm.
can we become a Viksit Bharat in 2047-50 without this incomplete occupational distribution? Like,
Very good question. Let me, should I just take it?
Yeah,
Because some of your stuff is also related, but anyway, I can come back on it. huh?
Right.
Yeah. So, let me refer you, no, that is a good question, because again, it gives a chance, because one cannot explain everything, you know, when one is talking. Please go back to what I said about real wage growth, okay? There were 3 categories, remember?
yes,
I have now investigated, I've started investigating, going more deeply into that what is happening, okay? That is not trickle down growth. That is trickle up growth. Please think about it for a minute, okay?
you say the
It is-
casual and
Yes, the self-employed, which are the biggest informal sector, the real average income growth is 4.2% per annum. The next is casual labor, which you always think, oh, these are unskilled. You think. That's what I'm trying to investigate. What is going on?
but in the same
नहीं,
slide,
एक मिनट, आपको मैं आऊंगा आपके पर, but let us have the facts first, ना? Then we go to the analysis. Okay? I say again, I'm not talking to you, but I think it's important for whoever is listening to me to understand what I always say on Twitter. By the way, if you want to follow me, it's at DRA Virmani. DR Virmani. I forgot. Anyway, no. That scientific method is first the data, then the analysis, third the policy, then the views. Okay. So I'm just going step by step. I'm going to come to your thing. Just be a
no,
little
you're
patient.
talking about that slide.
Yeah, I'm going to explain what you have a point, but let me get to it, because otherwise people will not understand. If you want to talk, people will not understood. There's no point. Nah? So let me explain. So that is trickle up actually, which is strange, right? I mean, I could have imagined it's all the same, right? Trickle down says the top is benefiting, then little bit less, little bit less. Remember that? That is the old Marxist criticism of India. This is the opposite, as far as I can see. Okay, so what is going on, right? My only hypothesis is the whole problem is in skilling. You are not creating the right kind of skills. These are the salaried workers. These are the people who would have a regular job. You need the right kind of skills. Okay, you're not creating them. So what if you put out, let's say, I mean, let me take an arbitrary example. You know, we think of a plumber is something who works with pipes, but you know what a plumber is in a chemical plant? It's the guy who fixes the pipes. They have to be perfect. Skills. It's a different level of skills. Unless you have those skills, there is no job. Okay. And if you are inferior, they can't afford to have you. They'll probably have to have another guy sitting on your head. Kahin galti kar di to mar gaye. Okay. So the average income, I'm still trying to figure this out. Okay. So that would be my initial hypothesis, which I'm trying to explore. Okay. So it's a very complicated thing. So the initial answer I would give you not as a perfect thing. Maybe we'll meet in several months, but it's the skills which are lacking, which is why I'm giving so much emphasis to the skills. Okay. You have another hypothesis? Yeah.
See the question.
Yeah.
It's a very widespread pattern that you observe in densely populated economies. Okay. See, the share of agriculture in terms of employment and the share of agriculture in terms of value added will differ hugely. In China, the agricultural value added is at 8%. Now that their share of income, but the share of employment even now is about 22%. Okay? And if you take, say, Korea, which is another densely populated economy, the share of agriculture may be in the low percentage, 3, 4, but the share of employment is double that. Okay. So the point is that, it's a well-known thing that those economies which are well endowed with land, the Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the Keynes group, it's only there where the agricultural share of employment and the agricultural share of GDP can come closer together.
Excellent point. Yeah.
Right?
I didn't
So
have that data.
India is inevitably going to have a much higher share of people in agriculture as compared to its value add.
Right.
Okay?
That's an excellent point.
Yeah. So
I want
now,
to add one
now,
thing.
now, yeah. Now the point is, there's a question that follows from it. What it logically leads to is the need to protect agriculture as India's income increases. Because as India's income increases and the poor get incorporated,
Yeah.
including those in the agriculture.
Yeah, that is related to your
Yeah,
earlier point.
Yeah, that what happens is that, you know.
But I have a slightly
yeah.
different thing.
So
Yeah.
what happens then is that, you know, at high levels of income, suppose if agricultural incomes of the people in agriculture were to triple, a lot of agriculture becomes actually non-competitive.
So
what I'm saying is that you need to protect.
Right. But there is some.
Where is that strategy?
I have a little
explicit statement.
Okay, let's go to this. This is your question.
Yeah.
So here is the problem. And my second part of which I'm going to answer, which you can disagree with. One part of it is skilling. Okay, whether it's in services, we are focused too much on the high end. That's why I emphasize now the middle skills. What I have told you about skilling, that's the middle skill which will raise the average income of the employed person. Okay. The second part is policy. You can ask me that you just told me that you changed all these policies and done a good thing, right? You remember I gave you 2 slides on policies, and now you're saying policies, they are still wrong. Well, let me tell you what is wrong. In Punjab, that subsidized system of wheat and rice is so inimical that the price of land in Punjab is so high that no manufacturing can be set up there. So your subsidy policies create an environment which cannot have manufacturing. Okay, that is one. Second, you have distorted trade policies. So you can't get out of that system. People will keep on demanding and selling only wheat and rice. Okay, you are not able to get out of a system that somebody says, okay, let me try some exotic fruit. If you had a vibrant trading sector, which you are not allowing, which those 3 laws were supposed to do, you will see new types of agriculture develop. You will see agro-processing develop.
Yeah.
I guarantee it. Okay.
That there's no doubt.
That is the second or third point, because subsidy is kind of related. When you subsidize that sector with zero power, with assured market, which are assured price, everything is assured and they want more. Okay, that's a disaster for growth. So let me come to, well, we can pursue it from here only if you want to. Yeah, okay. You have additional points.
No, my point is very simple, that what you say about agriculture, if you remove the distortions, okay, I don't mean remove the subsidies, because the two are different. If you give all the subsidies through non-distortionary measures. See, today, for instance, when you give agricultural subsidies, you give it through a price-based mechanism. Okay, and since the use prices are zero for electricity, India pulls out more groundwater than the rest of the world together, to grow less than 10% of the world's food. Similarly, when you provide canal water at a near throwaway price, agriculture becomes extremely inefficient. So we grow rice with 6,000 units of water. Liters.
That's a partial answer to Dr. Nankumar. I'll give you another one.
We grow, whereas China grows with 600 liters. So I agree with you that a whole lot of efficiency improvements can come if we reform agriculture. But my point is the following, that politically and even otherwise, agriculturists deserve a higher income. Okay? I'm not talking about landowners alone, but those people who are engaged in agriculture. So whatever you do with all these efficiency improvements, by creating, for instance, direct subsidy schemes or better ways of giving the subsidy and so on, removing the distortions, agriculture absorbs almost 90% of all the waste which happens in the electricity sector. You're running the electricity sector to the ground because of agriculture. Now, let's say you remove all of this, you'll have a reasonably efficient agriculture. Even then,
globally, the land-rich countries will be able to cut it. The Australia, Canada.
I see, this is where I disagree.
No, what I'm saying in land using crops. It's only in labor-intensive
Yes,
crops
that's the
like
point.
mushroom,
That's exactly the
you know,
point. There are tons
your
of them.
horticulture, fish,
Absolutely.
and meat and processed foods that we will do well. Okay.
Animal husbandry.
Yeah, and therefore that change has to come. Okay, let's imagine that this comes. Okay, when by the time it comes, we would be, and if we successfully steer that, we would be at the upper middle income level. What you have said. Beyond that, will require protecting Indian agriculture. Protecting in the sense that
So I have no disagreement with
Yeah.
what you're saying for I don't know how many years, because I've been out of government 15 years, so it has to be 10 years previous to that. What I have said is a simple thing. Take all the subsidies, every single rupee of subsidies you're giving to farmers, give it to them by an alternative method.
Right.
Free up all the markets. Nobody is saying don't give them. In GST, we said, okay, we'll show you 14%. Here you say, okay, we will show you for 5 years,
Right.
even a growth rate on the subsidies. It is not a question of, you cannot get a modern or a productive culture or higher income unless you do this. I mean, I am willing to bet against anybody. Dr. Nandkumar asked about this thing. Yesterday, I saw a Sikh gentleman giving data on cancer. He's saying you use double the amount of pesticides in Punjab because they're all subsidized. You're killing your children. Nobody wants to talk about that because it's not politically wise to do so. So the point is not there are hundreds of problems you're creating. It's not one. Nobody is saying don't give them
Well,
subsidy. Nobody.
Let me add one more to it. Because of this subsidization, what happens is Gujarat is able to grow wheat competitively, and it intrudes into the market for Haryana. Haryana and Punjab grow rice.
Okay, yeah.
And therefore it
I
hits
think
Eastern
we
India.
have, or you still have a question?
Like,
Okay.
like, in the same time, what you are talking about, that trickle up thing, but even the same that slide shows that casual workers and self-employed workers, their salary or earnings in nominal terms, what the figures are showing is below the minimum wages. If you take, this, suppose 375 as a kind of a committee that recommended 375 rupees long back in 2019 as a minimum wage. Even you take that number, the self-employed and casual workers.
Those are only real numbers. There's no
real
nominal
numbers.
there. That
So
means they
I
already
think that
deflated.
Is it that the real wage growth that you're talking about, is it because of very low base? Or is it because their actual earnings even below?
So here this is precisely why I give the per capita GDP, because we use low base selectively. My point is everything is connected with your low per capita income. Start with that assumption. Then I'm not saying you should not do better, but don't put yourself down. You see, and it does not help the analysis. You come to the wrong conclusions. Where we are really behind that, you must make extra effort. Where you're above it, you can afford to let things happen. The first thing is data, then the analysis. It is not that don't do. Okay. If I said that, so I gave you some of the numbers where we are doing better. I'm not saying don't do even better, but don't say we are lousy. We are not. We are at a level which is better than the other per capita income.
Sure. See, what he's saying is the growth you have clearly brought out. Are you saying that even at the end point, the money wages, if you were to get back to the real wage into the inflation over that period, would still be below the minimum?
No, I don't give any nominal wage, so that cannot be from my table. No?
He can't derive it directly from
No, I have it in my computer, but it's not here.
Yeah, it's not here.
Yeah, so you can't come to that because it's already divided by 100. No, it's a CPI.
It's divided by the CPI and then the growth. Yeah,
so you can't get it from
difference. There is a huge difference though between the PLFS, correct, and the CMI's data. Is that something which?
Let me tell you again. If you seem to be, I hope others are interested.
Yeah.
I have then also carefully looked at the rural wage data. And one thing it's concerning, the other is bits confusing still. I mean, these things are limited data. You have to draw conclusions which are reasonable. No? I mean, I'm not trying to do magic or politics here. Yeah. I have to be convinced that there is something in it, right? So you take that as given. When I'm coming to you to speak on economics. What I find is that actually what is the best thing which is happening is what is called handicrafts. The highest real wage increase is in handicrafts. Now, if you think about it, I have visited Rajasthan and a few other places. There's a demand. It has been created. Yeah. That's why you can sell. You have the skills, you train your son, you train whatever your nephew, whoever wants to come into it. You have the demand, you have the skills. You don't get income increase unless you have those two things. Just having demand doesn't help. Just having the skill doesn't help. You've got to connect the two. Right. That's the main point I'm trying to raise. And why I'm doing it, I've talked to tens of people now over the last 15 months, sorry. And that's the problem, I've seen it. There's several levels. You're not creating the right skills. You're not connecting them. People don't even know what is needed. I mean, this thing, if I had not done the research, I would now say, go for handicraft. There is a demand. Yeah, okay, I mean, anywhere I went, even let's say Bihar, they have these little paintings. Yes, great thing. Let's have it. It's not just a political slogan of the Prime Minister. It's actually coming in the ground. Okay? So unless we look at second, what I am saying,
there are limits to that market.
It's being developed. It's happening.
By all means, exploit it, but there are obviously
obviously you have to do more again. No? If it's a Bihar hasn't done it, Rajasthan, they have to do it. No? I mean, one cannot sit in Delhi and say everything will be done. No? You have to first get the facts right. No? And the second part is the same thing I said. This is not just a chemical plant. It's easier to understand. What I am seeing is that certain products are getting obsolescent. You know, in a rural area, you used to buy certain things. Now there are new products coming in. You have to, and some of the skills needed are different. Okay. So I mean, just again, an extreme example. Again, I have to check this out. Like you may have furniture which has to be put together in a certain way. Now, if the carpenter would learn this, his income will actually increase.
Sure.
But this is not happening.
No, it can happen.
I know, that's what, but first you have to get the data, then you get the analysis, then you do the policy now. Sure, but nobody is doing it.
Yeah. See, okay. Yeah. I think we are kind of close to, where is that?
I think, yeah, we have a few minutes left only. 7:15 was our date. But it's good. We've had a great discussion. I'm happy, especially thanks, Professor Morris.
Another small point. Like you talked about.
We'll take one now.
Yeah, essentially all are thanking you. They're all thanking you. They're saluting you.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. And they're very happy. Yeah.
Okay. Just last question. Okay. 2 minutes for whatever.
Yes. So that technology work from anywhere kind of.
Right.
Already we are seeing that proliferation of vegan platform. Like they are doing, like they are assigning work, like not in kind of work, the concept of workspace is changing. Like you can work from anywhere. So, but the problem in this sector is also that there is terms of employment and condition of labor being regulated. The way the people are working, like they are working from any place. That's true. They are working from the room, working from home, at any place. But the kind of deal they are getting and kind of conditions under which they are working are sometimes not very desirable. Like, okay, they're getting not jobs, getting some work at their disposal, but the condition of work and terms of employment are not at all defined. So what's about your perception of it?
So as a fact, I can't question. I have no other information. But what I would look at as a researcher, okay, as an economist, again, what I would look at is take persons. I mean, if I was suggesting a research, suppose I had two PhD students. Yeah. Okay. I would say, please collect data on the skills of these people and somebody in a different area in the same skills, and please give me the comparative wages and all.
So the alternative.
Before you give me that, I cannot say.
Right.
I need the data, I'll do the analysis, then I'll suggest the policy. That would be my approach as somebody who has advised on policy for 50 years. You know, I cannot give policy advice to people who trust me without having the data and the analysis. I just cannot do it.
That's it. That's fine.
Okay, so thanks, Tan. It was such a pleasure to have you. I hope, from the comments, I could see that many of our online participants also share the same sentiment. So let me thank you once again. And, I hope, we could stay engaged as an institution,
sure.
for other events as well, Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
I am surprised there's still after 2.5 hours, there's somebody still hanging around. Thank you all.
Thank you. Yeah, so, okay.
Sir,
so,
that's because of your passion and the way you explained the things.
Yeah.
So
Thank you,
you
thank
have
you.
hooked
Yeah,
us.
I
You have
mean,
hooked us.
So there's just
thank you. That's very appreciated, because I often have to apologize to people, because when I get started, I get very passionate. That is what has kept me going. I'm almost 75 now, but these things help to keep me going. So thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, let's skip that. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We can have a photo.
Yeah.
Come. Oh, yeah, huh? Oh, you all, yeah,
Okay.
they all want to
Yeah.
have.
Crystal, just go ahead quickly. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
give a
what?
vote of thanks. Better.
Oh, vote of thanks. Yeah. I'll just take this.
Getting these insightful vision at the point. His comprehensive talk has provided us with a profound understanding of the potential paths and opportunities for our nation's development. We are thankful for his valuable time and wealth of knowledge he shared with us today. We are also grateful to our director, Dr. Ajit Parulekar, Dean, Dr. Venkatesh Naga, and Registrar, Dr. Sumit Datta, for the support to organize this interaction. I thank Dr. Sebastian Morris, Chair of the Center of Public Policy and Governance, and Dr. Kingshuk Sarkar, Chair of the General Management and Public Policy Area, for the guidance and initiative to organize this talk. I thank my colleagues, Bernice D'Souza, Vivida Amonkar, Vaibhav, for their efforts and support. Many thanks to our faculty members, staff, students, guests who have joined us both offline and in person, for being part of this memorable talk and interactive session, and for contributing to the success of this event. We look forward to your presence during other events. Let us carry forward the inspiration from this talk as we strive to contribute to the realization of the vision for a Viksit Bharat in 2047. Thank you all.
Thank you.